Next on Close Up, COVID cases skyrocket in Iowa. We asked doctors why Omicron spreads so much faster and why your old cloth mask no longer cuts it for protection. The Iowa legislature gavels in its 2022 session tomorrow. Republicans and Democrats lay out what they hope to accomplish in the next 4 months. Eliminating the ACT. The Board of Regents looks at dropping the test requirement for college admission, what they think might be wrong with the current system.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm Amanda Rooker, and Iowa is in the midst of a COVID surge. According to data released Friday, in the latest 7-day period, nearly 25,000 people tested positive. That's an increase of nearly 31% from Wednesday, and it's a 103% increase from where we were just a month ago. The Center for Disease Control estimates the Omicron variant makes up 3/4 of all COVID cases nationwide. We recently spoke with doctors Mike Brownlee and Daniel DiCamo with the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. They explain why Omicron is spreading so quickly.
Due to the fact that it has a shorter incubation period than prior variants, so the time from one case to a subsequent case is shorter, which also helps it spread faster. If there's any silver lining at all here, it's that it does seem to carry less risk of hospitalization, due in part to the fact that many more people have previously been infected or have hopefully been vaccinated, which provides a lot of protection against hospitalization, receiving the vaccine. But it also may be just a little bit less virulent or severe than the Delta variant, which explains why the risk of hospitalization is lower. However, the rapid and widespread of the virus still threatens our healthcare system because the sheer numbers of people infected, even if a lower percentage need to be hospitalized, can result in increased numbers in our hospitals, and then very importantly, decreased staff to take care of those patients because they are out due to COVID-19, given how rapidly it spreads. The last thing I'll say is that although the Omicron variant is better at evading some of the activity of the vaccines, in other words, there's a slightly reduced protection against any Omicron infection from vaccination, the vaccines are still highly effective at preventing severe disease and hospitalization from Omicron. And in particular, getting a booster dose seems to restore a lot of the activity of the vaccines, even against the Omicron variant.
We are monitoring the situation very closely. We know that, as was mentioned, there's quite an impact on our staffing, potentially based on the spread of the virus. So we're prepared to stay open, to stay safe, and we're monitoring the situation very closely so that we can continue to provide care for our community.
So with any variant, but obviously specifically now we're talking about Omicron, how does UIHC specifically, how do you record when a case is specifically that particular variant?
So that's an excellent question. The initial tests that we do, the antigen, well, we generally do the PCR testing, but the PCR tests and the antigen tests, they both just simply check for SARS-CoV-2. They alone will not tell you whether you have the Delta or Omicron variant. So we send the samples that are positive for the SARS-CoV-2 virus to the state hygienic lab, where they are doing sequencing every day, and they return that sequence information to us, and that's what tells us whether the virus is Omicron or Delta. That similar data gets reported up to CDC, and those are the data that you can see on the CDC website getting updated every week with the different proportion of, or the changing proportion of SARS-CoV-2 viruses that are due to the different variants. So that's how we know that now in our region of the country, really probably I think the most recent CDC data is 77% of all the infections were due to the Omicron variant. I expect that we'll see a peak of Omicron cases sometime within the next couple of weeks in the U.S. Overall. But because the Omicron variant arrived in the upper Midwest and the Midwest a little bit later, I expect our peak will be closer to the end of January or early February. And then if some of the other parts of the world that have seen Omicron earlier are any insight into this, the hope is that the decline will be quite rapid. So in other parts of the world, in South Africa is one area where the increase was dramatic in terms of its pace, but also the decline has been quite steep as well.
And I also would add that increasing our mask game means wearing a mask. I think we've really gotten out of the habit, even going to the grocery store, of wearing a mask. And I see that every day when I'm in public. I think that's what we need to continue to see in the next several weeks, is that where you've gotten out of the habit of wearing a mask, regardless of the filtration or the type of mask, just having one on will at least help slow the spread. But as Dr. Diekema had mentioned, having a well-fitting mask is very helpful.
And doctors say cloth masks no longer cut it when it comes to the Omicron variant. KCCI's Andrew Mullenbeck talked with the chief medical officer at Broadlawns Medical Center. He explains exactly how much protection each type of mask really gives you.
So if somebody was exposed without mask to each other, it will take 15 minutes. With fabric mask, it will take about 20 minutes to pass from one person to another person. With surgical mask, it goes up to 35 minutes of contact, and we can be still protected. And with N95, more than 2.5 hours. So why do we now change to recommending surgical masks, that we can spend a little bit longer time with people we want to spend time with and feel protected compared to without mask or with fabric masks?
How difficult do you think it is for people who have had 2 years of getting accustomed to these same disposable masks? I've got one right here in the vehicle with me. We're all used to them. How difficult is that messaging to now tell them that probably isn't providing much protection and you should get a new one?
It's not easy. I can sympathize, and I feel for people who would question the authorities, question CDC, and that's what, unfortunately, Andrew, pandemics do to us. And pandemic means that things which are different than what we as a physician have been used to dealing with infections, and we learn every new mutation happens. Hopefully no other mutation will come, but doesn't tell me anything. There's no guarantee that the future mutation of this COVID virus might change the guidelines again.
The spread of the Omicron variant is also pushing COVID hospitalizations to higher levels than we've seen in more than a year. Friday, Iowa hospitals reported treating almost 900 patients with COVID. That's over 100 more than there were just 2 days earlier. Over 72% of those COVID patients were not fully vaccinated against the disease. Doctors say most of the vaccinated hospitalized for COVID are older and did not get a COVID booster. Central Iowa hospitals say they're getting quickly overwhelmed by all the COVID patients. Last week, several of those hospitals put ads like this in newspapers and out across social media, practically begging people to mask up and vax up. Well, the problem of overworked hospital employees has gotten so bad in some parts of the country, the National Guard has been called in to help. Governor Kim Reynolds recently explained why that won't happen here in Iowa.
Well, no, because it's a citizens National Guard, and so a lot of them are already working in healthcare facilities, so I would have to take them off of that and put them. So what we have done is we put another relief in the last health declaration, and then we've brought in 100 nurses that will provide assistance to over 17 hospitals, and those are outside of the state at the request of the hospitals. They didn't want to see the existing staff just move from one place to the other. We've also provided funding to hospitals that they could help with some of the support and needs of their existing staff as well. So we brought in traveling nurses, we've addressed it in the healthcare declaration, and we've continued to work with like innovative funding for our hospitals where they could then shift some of the money to help with salaries and retention of their existing workforce.
And state health officials release new COVID numbers tomorrow morning. Watch for those starting on KCCI 8 News at noon. But next on Close Up, the 2022 Iowa legislature gets back to work tomorrow. The items both Republicans and Democrats agree they must get done during this session.
Grand Canyon.
The 2022 session of the Iowa legislature starts tomorrow morning at the State House, with Republicans firmly in control. The GOP has a 14-vote advantage in the Iowa Senate and an 18-vote advantage in the Iowa House. And then, of course, they have the governor's office as well. KCCI was at the State House last week as the governor laid out her agenda for the upcoming session.
We need to work together to overcome our challenges and push our economy to new heights. As always, I'll be saving the specifics of my policy proposals for my condition of the state next week, but you can look for a bold and historic agenda that includes, among other things, another round of tax cuts, a comprehensive workforce package, and of course, continued education reform. I believe that this upcoming session represents yet another opportunity for us to come together as one state, accomplish great things, and continue to lead this nation. Iowa is moving in the right direction, and we're determined to build on the progress and the momentum that we've seen over the last couple years.
You mentioned the workforce issues, and I know you said you'll have some of that in the condition of the state. Yeah. Is there any, are you hoping to see more funding in some programs? Is there anything legislation policy-wise with the legislation?
Well, there will be some, yeah, there will be some policy, and it's going to be a comprehensive bill. We've already done a lot to tackle workforce. It's been a priority of mine since day one. I've said all along, we have more job openings than we have people on unemployment. Right now, the unemployment code was written a long time ago when we were in a much different position. And today, we need to incentivize work, not pay people to stay home. And we're willing to invest in Iowans. There's tremendous opportunities out there for great careers across every single sector. That is just all business and industry talk to me about when I am traveling in the state and I'm in communities. I don't care what size they are, small, medium, large, doesn't matter what sector. They have great capacity for growth. They've had record years, but really what is supply chain is also having an impact, but workforce is by far their biggest issue. Now we're 35th out of 42 states that charge an income tax. And even with the historic tax reform that I passed in 2023, that would only move us to 26, and I can tell you right now that every single one of those states are reducing taxes so that they can be more competitive, grow their economy, and bring people to the state of Iowa. So even if I'm there for, a short time, I'm not going to be there long unless we continue to be in the game. We need to do it fiscally responsibly and be fiscally responsible in how we do it. We need to make sure that we can maintain it. We have to watch our spending, but most importantly, we have to make sure that we can still fund priorities that are important to Iowans: public safety, education, and I think we've demonstrated that we can do that.
Legislative leaders from both parties also laid out their priorities last week. Republicans say tax cuts are at the top of their agenda, and both parties say solving Iowa's workforce crisis is a #1 priority. Where they disagree is how to accomplish those goals.
I think this upcoming session, as you all know, tax conversations are going to be a significant part of what's going on in the session. We need to get those tax dollars back in their hands. So I think that's going to be a huge part of it. Obviously, when it comes to anything dealing with freedom, I use for examples, with education, we're seeing all across the country that you're seeing continued interest in parents having their voices heard. We're seeing that, just recently in Virginia, one of the driving issues that changed control of a legislature. So I think you're going to see a lot of issues discussing parental involvement in education, and then clearly just our continued path in managing the budget responsibly.
We have what might be considered a workforce issue, but I look at that as not an issue, more as just the result of a strong economy. I will tell you what, Iowa is strong. We are going to walk into those tax cuts, and anything that we do is going to be sustainable, meaningful, and long-term. It's not going to be a short-term Band-Aid. We are looking at rate cuts for Iowans so that Iowans can control their own destinies better than the state can. And we look at continuing to fund our priorities, which have been historically law enforcement and education, and we will continue to do that.
Thank you very much, Jennifer Converse, Iowa House Minority Leader. We are focused, Iowa House Democrats, on making sure that the Reynolds workforce crisis actually gets addressed in a realistic way beyond just putting a Band-Aid on the issue or saying that it's not a problem. My district includes many businesses that tell me that the #1 issue they have facing them is a workforce crisis, and it is caused by myriad issues, and those issues need to be addressed holistically, not just a Band-Aid or not just a silver bullet that will not be a silver bullet. We're also focused on making sure that childcare is accessible and affordable. That's tied to workforce. We're focused on making sure that wages are fair and that affordable housing is accessible. These are the issues we're hearing from Iowans about, and these are the things that we're going to push to make sure get prioritized, because it is not enough just to say we're going to cut taxes and think that will solve all of the problems. I do think that some of the tax cut proposals we've been hearing actually cause more problems when it comes to how we're going to pay for some things or whether or not we're going to move taxes over to someone else.
I'll start first by mentioning that I couldn't agree more with what we've already heard this afternoon, that our workforce crisis is the #1 issue facing the legislature here in 2022. We know that we have fewer Iowans in the workforce today than we did a decade ago, while at the same time nationally more than 10 million Americans more are in the workforce today than there were a decade ago. And so we know that that is a significant issue facing our state. We know that there are unique challenges that are exacerbating the workforce crisis here in Iowa, and I hope that we're able to see some bipartisan cooperation along the various topics that we think would make a good move us in the right direction on the workforce issue. Those are going to be things like making sure that we continue our work on child care, which I know Speaker Grassley has spoken about his interest in, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to see some good bipartisan work there. I'm hopeful that we'll see work on unpaid family leave, expanding pre-K options, things that'll make it easier for our parents to rejoin the workforce if they're so inclined, and making sure that as we talk about taxes, that we're making sure that we're staying very, very focused on the middle class. As you all know, Democrats did vote for some of the bipartisan middle class tax cuts that we saw this past session. And so if we're talking about tax reform this year, our focus is going to be, I would echo Senator Sinclair, we want them to be sustainable and making sure that we're not creating future fiscal challenges for our state, that they are sustainable and that they're squarely focused on the middle class. We don't think that millionaires and billionaires need another tax cut. We want to stay really laser focused on Iowa's working families, which have really borne the brunt of this pandemic.
You can watch for complete coverage of opening day here on KCCI 8 News starting at noon. Well, rioters swarmed the U.S. Capitol building 1 year ago. Senator Charles Grassley was there. We asked him about changes at the Capitol since the attack.
Cracks in brick, cracks in block.
Well, it was just over 1 year ago that Washington and this country were left grappling with the insurrection that happened at the U.S. Capitol. Demonstrators fresh from a Stop the Steal rally with then President Donald Trump marched to the Capitol to stop the certification of Joe Biden as the next president. Iowa Senator Charles Grassley was overseeing the Senate certification roll when he suddenly called the proceedings to a halt.
And it will stand in recess.
And to a secure location. Grassley at the time was the third in the presidential line of succession. KCCI chief political reporter Cynthia Fodor talked with Senator Grassley on the anniversary of the attack. She asked him whether he's concerned about another Capitol breach.
Do you feel working in the Capitol there, do you feel safer now and that everything is being done to make sure this never happens again?
I believe so, although there's several hundred police officers that we're short that we've got to get trained and get up. Now, some of that is because we've had some resignations since a year ago because of what happened that year, but also the virus shut down the training. So for those two reasons, we're short of police, but I don't have any reason to believe that even though we're short a few policemen, that there's any more danger to our things now because of what happened a year ago.
And in the year since the riots, federal agents have arrested more than 700 suspects. 6 of those arrested were Iowans. One of the suspects, Daryl Johnson of St. Ansgar, pleaded guilty last week. Johnson's son from Minnesota also admitted guilt. Both will be sentenced April 12th and face up to 5 years in prison. Students wanting to get into Iowa, Iowa State, or Northern Iowa have to take the ACT test. Why that requirement could soon end.
Starting at 5, KCCI shows you what.
Students at Iowa's 3 state universities don't return to campus until next week. But this Wednesday, the Iowa Board of Regents looks at changing the requirements for getting accepted to those schools. They could drop the rule that says students have to take a standardized test like the ACT or SAT. A Regents admissions study team looked into how good those tests are when it comes to predicting student success in college. The team found that while ACT scores may be a good indicator of first-year success, the student's high school GPA was much better at showing which students would graduate in 4 years. When they looked at students who scored between 18 to 20 on their ACT, 93% who also had a 4.0 grade point average and 40% who had a 3.0 grade point average graduated in 4 years. Compare that with the college graduation rates among students who scored 10 points higher on the same test. 4 graduation rates were fairly consistent. The admissions study team also found lower income and rural students have less access to the ACT or SAT test preparation tools, and that can result in lower scores. The proposal would not eliminate standardized testing altogether. Students can still take them to help receive automatic admission. KCCI will tell you what the Regents decide. Well, thank you so much for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close-Up. We'll see you back here Sunday. Have a great day.